Welcome back to Sunrise Daily, coming to you live from our Abuja studio. I do have with me retired group captain and security consultant, Mr. Sadiq Shehu. Mr. Shehu, you heard the submission of Mr. Ogunye, and I want to give you an opportunity to respond.
Okay, thank you very much. As two human beings discussing an issue, I agree substantially with some of the things what Mr. Ogunye said, but I have to draw the conclusion, I think in some areas he misunderstood what I said. First, when I said that the military mind, by trading, by equipment, is orientated towards facing an enemy and killing him, I think that is not something far-fetched. It's something that is acknowledged the world over. That's why, in fact, some countries, they even have specific legislation, which we don't have in Nigeria, which says the military should never be used in a law enforcement agency. Like in America, they have what is called the Poitus Concomitus Act, or PCA, which bans the use. But again, the situation in the US and other countries is not the same as in Nigeria. Our constitution allows the use of military. What I am saying about mindset, I said training, giving the soldiers non-lethal weapons, teaching them on human rights and crowd control mechanisms will help them to adapt, to remove them a little from that mindset of war to a mindset of law enforcement, where the people you are dealing with are not enemies.
Peaceful engagement.
Peaceful engagement. Okay, I will also agree with him that in all honesty, proactive planning would have helped in reducing this thing. What do I mean? I heard him talking about a meeting. Yes, one of the principles of law enforcement is de-escalation, is mediation. There's nothing wrong. These people I think this, what they call it, the Husseiniya trek that they do every year is a well-known event. I can't recall, I think for the last 3 years, if I'm not right, they have always taken it. They also give warning. In all honesty, it is not a weakness to go and meet them. Like he said, any other agency, not necessarily the military. Because again, if we're talking of Shia, we're saying of security forces, comparing military, police, and all the others. Somebody should have met them, like he said. Which route are you taking? How many people are we expecting? And incidentally, they could even give the road users that please on such and such date, from such and such date, the Shiites will be having a procession march. You may wish, based on this advice, to use the route, or you may take another route. However, we have two lanes, like for example, you could dedicate one lane for them to move. I mean, there are proactive measures.
That's what usually happens when the Chibok protests unfold.
Exactly.
Bring back our girls.
Facilitating a peaceful protest. Facilitating is the work of government. What do I mean? Facilitating is to make sure that the protest goes according to plan. But again, I have to mention one issue about whether the Shiites, could you describe them as unarmed peaceful protesters or not? Here, I think there are two issues.
No, well, this is the question, because yes, if Mr. Ogunye mentioned, he said, look, you know, why is it that in some of the developed countries with developed militaries that they're able to engage in humanitarian situations, they're able to, you know, do things that positively affect the citizenry, and that he was essentially alluding to this idea that that's not so much the case in Nigeria. In your view, do you equate the Shiite protests with some of the other kinds of protests that would entail a very peaceful engagement? What are your thoughts about that?
No, certainly. Under the context of military assistance to civil authority, it embraces different kinds of operations. If you are talking of humanitarian assistance, what the Nigerian military does is different from controlling, you know, a protest. There are two different things. So I think Mr. Ogunye should know these are two different, you know, scenarios. If you say humanitarian assistance, here you are dealing with humanitarian assistance, the risk to the soldier or the law enforcement officer is very minimal or even non-existent. You get the point? But in a protest, there is a more heightened risk for the law enforcement officer and also for other citizens who are not taking part. So these are two different sets.
I want to get to the planning issue, the aspect of planning a protest, making sure that all authorities involved are aware of the protest. Is that something that you think can be more effectively communicated or arranged between the Nigerian military and, for example, the Shiite group in this case, to essentially say, look, we want to do this, this is how we're going to do it, and essentially plan for us? I mean, is that even a possibility, though, if the military is showing a negative approach, for a lack of words, to that relationship?
It's possible. But again, like everything in Nigeria, we have legal confusion surrounding that. Because what I want to see, if you look at the Public Order Act, it says that state governments and federal government have the right to determine the routine, the timing, the placing of somebody. It also demands that somebody obtains a permission first. I am going to stage a protest on such and such date. But of course, I know again there is a court injunction which says that requiring that permission is not required. But even where permission is not obtained by the protester, let's assume he follows the decision of the court that it is not needed. It is not a bad thing for the security forces for an event like this march, which we know has been happening many years, and the Shiites have given a warning to go and meet them. We want to know, we want to protect you. We also want to protect the right of other road users. Where are you coming? How many people are you going to be? This will give, the tools to inform the general public, because we're talking of also the rights of the public officer. And again, communication is very, very important. You understand? Now, having said that, there could even be a time that a protest will be spontaneous. The security forces didn't see it. The organizer did not inform the security forces that, and then it breaks spontaneously. But even spontaneously, within the dictates of democracy and global best practices for law enforcement, there should be plans, a contingency plan of meeting where a protest is spontaneous.
Well, one of the questions, when you look at, for example now, knowing the history between the Nigerian military and this particular group and how violent that history is, at what point does the federal government consider opting for other internal security mechanisms at its disposal? For example, what comes to my mind is the Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps. I mean, is it not for the sake of internal stability that they were even constituted in the first place? And can they not be taking the role of the military in curtailing some of these protests, specifically engaged and trained to do that, as opposed to bringing in the Nigerian armed forces?
Yes, that is a very viable alternative. However, the look beyond the military to confront the IMN, unfortunately, has been spoiled by a perception of IMN as a very dangerous organization. If you have engaged any Nigerian, whether a security person or ordinary Nigerian, in all honesty, most people have this perception that they are very dangerous. And being very dangerous, most people believe it's only the military that can deal with them.
No, but this is exactly the challenge. If you look at the origins of Boko Haram, you will recall that there was a time that they were much less lethal than they have become.
Exactly.
There was a time when they had non-traditional weapons.
Yes.
They were engaging in these kinds of uncontrolled protests, etc. We know that it was the heavy hand of the Nigerian military that essentially aided and abetted the process of them becoming as lethal as they are today. And I want to ask you, when you look at IMN, and you consider what has happened with what Mr. Ogunye has referred to as the proxy war in places like Yemen with the Houthis, the Shia Houthi rebels, and in places like Lebanon, where you have Hezbollah, for example, and some of the other terrorist organizations moving against Sunni Muslim populations, which is predominant in Nigeria. What then does that say for the need to adjust on the part of the federal government to ensure that they do not precipitate, aid, and abet a process in which the IMN would become much more lethal tomorrow than it is today?
At the beginning of this conversation, I said in a democratic setting, when a group or a person disagrees with a government policy or government position or anything, three options are there. Either you take it on the chin and swallow whatever discomfort within the government policy. The second option is peaceful protest. Now, experts of democracy and security, they said if you block these two, the other option is for the group to carry arms. So in all our interventions, what we are saying is that we should find ways